In the previous video, we took a look at transferring audio from our DAW's timeline directly into Auto-Tune Pro. We took a look at using two different options. So for the first section of audio that we have at the beginning of our song over here, we used the pitch mode. And for this second section of audio that's a little bit further on down the line, we used pitch and time. Now, one thing to note is that if you are using the pitch algorithm, that we don't have the option to use either one of these time tools for our editing. If we choose either one of these, the icon is actually zeroed out or canceled out. But if we scroll over to the area that we use the pitch and time transfer method, you'll notice that we do have the option to use both of these tools because this audio was transferred using pitch and time. That being said, if you are using Auto-Tune Pro and you are not using the pitch and time, but you're just using the pitch and you want to clear up your view, there's a preference in the settings, which is enable time control. And we can deselect this and it will essentially get rid of those two different parameters so that when you're doing your editing, they're not distracting you. Okay, so that being said, let's start to take a look at some of these tools. Now we're going to have to jumble around a little bit in the order because in order to see what some of these tools do, we will have to enable some different preferences in Auto-Tune. But first of all, let's start off with this main one over here, which is the magnifying glass. So when you're viewing the editor display, I can lasso select a specific area if I wanted to view this up close in detail. Now, conversely, if I wanted to back out and kind of take steps back in terms of zooming out, then I can hold down Alt or Option on a Mac and single click will take me out. Or if you're on a PC, that's a control click. Now, one thing to point out though, is that depending on which one of these tools you have selected, we will always have the ability to use this area over here to zoom into specific sections based on a horizontal timeline zoom. So that's one thing to note when you're working. I'm going to go ahead and choose my magnifying tool and let's zoom into this section again. Maybe I just want to zoom out one click. The other tool I want to take a look at is this hand grabber tool. This is essentially a navigation tool that will allow you to move your screen from left to right without having to use your mouse scroll wheel. So this can be useful if you need to move things around. Now, in terms of our scaling or the vertical position of our time pitch trace, I can use my scroll wheel if you have a mouse that supports that, or we can use this function over here. Or we can also use these arrows over here to move in increments of 1. Now, in terms of a vertical zoom of everything, I can use the minus key or the plus key to either zoom in or out vertically to be able to get the resolution that I'm looking for in order to work. So I'm going to go ahead and select this tool and let's just make a zoomed selection to this state. Maybe I'll come out one step. Okay, so that looks pretty good. Now, these three tools over here, in order to kind of use these, we're going to have to make a decision as to how we want to interact with the pitch traces in Auto-Tune. And we can do that by simply choosing Make Curves or Make Notes. Now, let's talk about the difference between these two. If we choose Make Curves, you'll notice that the curves that were sung exactly as they were recorded from the input signal, essentially, we are able now to edit these curves. So now if I was to choose, for example, my main selection tool, and I clicked off to deselect all, I could then hover my cursor over top here, and you'll see we get this little icon. I could then move this relative to the original input pitch that was sung. Let's go ahead and click undo for a moment. Now, there's another thing that we can see. It's kind of hard to make out. Let's go ahead and zoom in. If we click this parameter, you'll notice that we have these anchor points. If we click at the end of the pitch trace, I can essentially adjust or alter the angle. You can see this little area over here. It's a circle. So I can offset the angle. Now, this is good if something drifted in an awkward way and you wanted to essentially correct that. We could do this. So let's use our magnifier tool. We'll zoom out a little bit. Maybe we'll take a look at this anchor point over here. And again, it's just hovering till you find it. And then I could kind of stabilize this whole entire pitch trace or the curve of this pitch simply by dragging this anchor point. Now the scissors tool will allow me to split these anchor points into different sections. So for example, let's go ahead and select this anchor point, and I want to go ahead and split this. Now I've created two new anchor points, which I could then grab by simply hovering over here. I could treat these individually. At any given point in time, if you need to backtrace your work, we could select all, go to this clear function. We could clear the pitch correction objects, the time changes, and both pitch and time. Let's go ahead and clear them both. This will bring us back to the beginning. Now, we also have another option, which is make notes. And this is the option that I would always prefer to use when working with Auto-Tune in the graphical mode. So I will go ahead and make notes. Now, when you make notes, it will automatically insert a note object across. And this is depending on this parameter over here, the number of notes you have selected. So obviously, the lesser amount of note objects that we ask Auto-Tune to create, it will minimize that. And if we increase this, now, one thing to keep in mind with the note objects is that in cases where you have a singer with quite a vast vibrato, in that the difference between the amplitude of the pitch is quite a bit, this may end up resulting in a bunch of different note objects being created. So again, backing off of this would take care of that. Now, another thing to point out is that each one of these note objects have their own unique retune speed. So for example, if I click any one of these or drag across them, like this, for example, you can see the retune speed is 40. This one is 40. In addition, this one is 40. Now, the default value of the retune speed of the note objects is indicated in the preferences. So it's worth mentioning that I actually changed the default retune speed for note objects. By default, Auto-Tune is going to set the note objects to a value of 10. So if I go ahead and set this now, click Save, let's click off of the blank screen here. We can select all, and we can choose to clear both pitch and time. Now, if I choose the Make Notes option, and I make these notes, you'll notice that these are all set to a retune speed of 10. Now, this is really useful when you're working in a manual mode, because essentially you can adjust these phrases on a note-by-note basis by simply selecting the note object and adjusting the appropriate retune speed for the specific note object. If, for example, I take my magnifying tool and I zoom into this section, watch what happens as I adjust the retune speed. So at a retune speed where I've essentially pulled it back pretty much fully counterclockwise, we have very minimal amount of pitch correction that's happening. But as I move my retune speed up, and as we noted from the previous video where we took a look at the automatic mode, watch what happens. If I move this all the way up, I can essentially flatline the pitch trace or the retune speed of this particular note object. And this is on a note object by note object basis. Now, one other thing I want to point out is, let's go ahead and choose our magnifying tool. I'm going to choose my Alter option to zoom out a little bit. You'll notice that if I click my main selector tool and I grab one of these note objects, I'm hearing a pitch. This is actually a new preference that was added in Auto-Tune Pro. In previous versions of Auto-Tune, we actually didn't hear this pitch. So if you'd prefer not to hear this pitch when doing any tuning adjustments on note objects, you could actually deselect this preference in the settings, play pitch when moving note objects. But the one thing to keep in mind here is that you would have to do this entirely on a visual basis, like so, and then you would have to then addition the work that you've done. Now, one more thing I want to point out over here, let's go ahead and let's re-enable play pitch when moving notes, and let's go back to this preference, snap to note. You'll notice that the notes that I moved when using the selector tool, they were snapping to the key that I've set up top in my key and scale. So for example, let's grab our magnifying tool. Let's just zoom out a little bit. I'm going to grab my selection tool. If I disable that preference, I can freely move in between these pitches that are outside of this scale. Let's go ahead and undo this move. We will re-enable that preference, snap to note. Now you'll notice that they are snapping to the scale. Now, the cool thing is that we can actually temporarily remove ourselves from that snapping behavior by holding the shift modifier. So let's say that I wanted to move this note and I wanted to move it up, but I didn't want to move it up and have it snap. I just wanted to move it up a little bit because relative to the performance, maybe I wanted this to just be up a little bit. So I could actually select my selection tool and then I can click and hold this, holding shift. I can now remove myself from the grid and let go, and I've snapped this essentially by using my ear. Now, when working with node objects and using the main arrow selection tool over here, we can actually resize these node objects by simply going to the edge of the boundaries of the node object and dragging. Conversely, we could also drag out to extend this node object selection as well. If you wanted to, for example, separate some of these node objects, maybe you have a case where Auto-Tune has detected this as a heavy vibrato, when in reality it's actually separate notes, we can grab the scissors tool and we can split these different areas like so. When we split these different areas, these node objects can then be treated as discrete individual node objects. And we could do whatever we need to in order to pitch correct them. Now, selecting a node object and pushing delete will simply get rid of that node object. And then one very useful tool that I like to use is we have the option to draw note objects defining the pitches to tune towards. This is really preferable if you wanted to have a 100% manual workflow. Simply head over to the area and I will drag across. And this has now created a note object for me, which is now affecting the pitch trace of this particular note. Okay, so let's go ahead. We'll choose our selector tool. And actually, I want to show you one more thing. If we back out a little bit, we can actually make adjustments by using the I-beam selection tool as well. So for example, if I wanted to make adjustments to all of these node objects, I could highlight across this area and then I could adjust their retune speed together. And in order to get rid of this highlighted selection, we need to do a single click outside of that area. Now, another thing to point out is that by using the main selection tool and dragging across, we're essentially doing the same thing. So we can adjust the retune speed of all these different parameters together as well. Now, one other thing to point out with respect to node objects is that as you see, we have a green and red pitch trace here. The green pitch trace that's overlaid is the result of the pitch correction based on the settings that you have set up. Now, this can be for either node objects or curves. So for example, if we select this, you'll note that this pitch correction trace in green is a result of this particular parameters that we've set. So if I was to adjust this, you can see that this retune speed is affecting the pitch trace drastically. And I can even flatline it if I wanted to as a creative intent. But the other thing to point out is that if I was to drag the handles of my node object and remove this particular section from the node object itself, then this area of the vocal performance would essentially pass through without being affected by the pitch correction and the retune speed that we assigned to our node object. Now, one other thing to point out is that we can actually make a selection over here and we can do something really cool. We can import auto. So what does this mean? Well, if you recall, we set up some basic auto preferences that worked really, really well in general as a broad stroke pitch correction for adjusting the tuning of this vocal. If I switch back to graphical mode, and let's say I said to myself, you know what? I really like the way that particular passage sounded in the automatic mode. I could import the curve from the auto mode. So that's something to take into account as well. So now that we've got a really good handle on all of these tools and what they do and how we can make use of them, in the next video, what I wanted to do is kind of put these editing tools in practice and start going through and doing some pitch correction on this vocal. So we'll catch you for more in the next video.